to Vienna to listen to the Ministry of External Affairs' briefing on the Prime Minister's visit to Austria.
Who's the Additional Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, looking after Austria and other countries in Central Europe region. With that, I invite Foreign Secretary to make his opening remarks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. Pavan, Secretary West, Mr. Sahu, Additional Secretary, and our spokesperson, friends from the media. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming out for this briefing on Prime Minister's ongoing official visit to Austria. I would start with brief opening comments and thereafter try and answer your questions on the visit. As you all know, Prime Minister arrived in Vienna yesterday evening, where he was received at the airport by the Austrian Foreign Minister, Excellency Schallenberg, whom you know Prime Ministers had a previous engagement with on the sidelines of the Glasgow summit of COP26. This is Prime Minister Modi's first visit to Austria. And is also first visit by an Indian Prime Minister after a gap of 41 years. As you all know, both countries are also celebrating 75th year of the establishment of diplomatic relations this year. The visit therefore assumes very special significance. In terms of engagements, which, as I said, are currently ongoing, the Austrian Chancellor, Excellency Karl Nehammer, hosted a private dinner for the Prime Minister last night. And this morning, Prime Minister received a formal ceremonial welcome at the Federal Chancellery by the Chancellor. Thereafter, the two leaders held detailed delegation-level talks covering the entire gamut of bilateral partnership across various domains. Thereafter, the two leaders also addressed to the press and gave their press remarks. Prime Minister Modi and Austrian Chancellor thereafter had a meeting, extensive meeting with the CEOs of major Indian and Austrian companies, focusing on the full spectrum of economic partnership between India and Austria, the opportunities that exist in various areas. During the meeting with the CEOs, the focus was particularly on green development, the digital space, including the artificial intelligence. Focus was also on the new and emerging technologies, renewable energy, waste management, water management, the startup space, and other areas of infrastructure. There were very clear opportunities that were pointed out by the CEOs on both sides, which under the direction and enablement of the two governments could be taken forward by the private sector on both sides. A reference was also made at this meeting about the Vienna startup bridge, which was set up in February 24. It has seen extensive participation of the Indian startup sector in Austria. At the bridge, I understand about 35 Indian startup companies participated. It's a very thriving and upcoming space which essentially connects the innovation ecosystem in India with the strong base of science, technology and research and the associated ecosystem that prevails in Austria. Environmental technologies, waste management technologies, clean transportation system, renewable energy, technology spectrum in these areas were in particular focus by the CEOs at this business interaction. Thereafter, the Prime Minister called on the President of Austria. They focused their discussions on both issues of importance in bilateral engagement also touched upon the regional and global issues. Prime Minister is also met three other important people from the Austrian society. In fact, those meetings are still going on. One of them was with the Austrian Nobel laureate, Mr. Anton Zeilinger, who received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022. Interacting currently, Prime Minister also is with the three leading Austrian Indologists and scholars of Indian history and philosophy, Dr. Birgit Kellner, Professor Martin Genzel, and Dr. Borean Larios. As you all know, Indology has a centuries-old roots in Austria. Prime Minister would be departing for India later this evening, but before that he would be also having a detailed interaction with the Indian diaspora in Vienna. In terms of issues which were focus of discussions between the Prime Minister and Chancellor during the meeting yesterday, private dinner yesterday, and the delegation level talks today, I would just categorize them into 3-4. First of them was on fighting terrorism. Both leaders spent considerable time expanding on the nature of this challenge and its various elements. And they were very clear, one, in terms of their unequivocal condemnation of terrorism in all its forms and manifestation. They also spoke about the challenge of combating this menace, particularly the way it exists in the cyberspace, both in terms of recruitment of terrorists and also in terms of the funding mechanisms that that happens through the cyber world. Cross-border terrorism, Prime Minister Modi highlighted to the Chancellor the nature of cross-border terrorism, the challenge of cross-border terrorism that India faces emanating out of Pakistan. They also agreed that no country should be allowed to provide safe haven to the terrorists. And in terms of cooperative activities in this field, they agreed that the relevant organizations on both sides should undertake information exchange and also real-time cooperation wherever the need arises to mitigate this challenge. While discussing the problem of terrorism and means to combat it, both Chancellor and Prime Minister focused on the associated problem of radicalization and what are the best ways to address it going forward. The second set of issues on which both Chancellor and the Prime Minister focused on was India-EU relationship. As you know, India-EU free trade agreement has been under negotiation for over 23 years. Prime Minister Modi and Austrian Chancellor agreed that this is an awfully long time for discussions to have been dragged on, and they agreed that this is something that both India and the EU should prioritize in terms of taking it forward at a quicker pace. They, of course, also spoke about the range of opportunities both in the economic and political space that are there in India-EU partnership, and also how India-Austria relationship positions synergetically in the overall India-EU relationship. The third issue on which the two leaders spent quite considerable time was on Russia-Ukraine conflict. Prime Minister spoke about India's perspective on Russia-Ukraine conflict. Austrian Chancellor desired and Prime Minister shared how he saw things as he assessed them from his visit to Moscow. Actually, since Prime Minister was coming from Moscow, there was an interest in knowing the view from there. You would have heard Prime Minister speak to the press after his delegation level talks with the Austrian Chancellor, where he very clearly and categorically captured the essence of India's position on Russia-Ukraine conflict. During the discussions, Prime Minister also brought out that how Russia-Ukraine conflict has also posed serious challenges to the larger world of global South and the developing countries in terms of challenges of food security, energy security, fertilizer security. And those are the things which are very crucial for the economic development of the global South countries, including India. So they spent quite some time on how those challenges were faced by the countries of the global South and the developing countries. They spent, as I said, considerable time on that. They also touched upon the recent developments in the ongoing issue in Gaza, conflict between Israel and Hamas. In terms of the outcomes, as I said, the joint statement that was agreed between the two sides, I think, is already up on the website for you to look at the specifics of what was agreed between the two sides. If I could just mention a few specifics here. In terms of the developments in the United Nations Security Council, India reiterated support for Austria's UNSC candidature for the term 27-28, while Austria expressed its support for India's candidature for the period 2028-29. Prime Minister also conveyed India's invitation to Austria for its membership of the International Solar Alliance, which recently achieved the important milestone by welcoming its 100th member. Prime Minister also invited Austria to join Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and the Global Biofuels Alliance. You would recall Global Biofuels Alliance was launched on the sidelines of the G20 summit held in India in September last year. Lastly, Prime Minister also extended an invitation to Austrian Chancellor, has also reiterated his invitation to the President of Austria to visit India at their convenience. The Chancellor accepted the invitation and will be working through the diplomatic channels to finalize the dates for the two visits. I will stop here and would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
The floor is yours. Please do introduce yourself before you ask the question. Yeah.
Hello, Sarah Emming. I work for the daily newspaper Kurier in Vienna. We've heard a lot about India wanting to be or play a possible role when it comes to peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. We've heard a lot about that today. Could you give us more details about it and about what Chancellor and the Prime Minister talked about, what options are thinkable, and could you elaborate a bit on that, please? Thank you.
Sahil?
I'm Sahil from ENI. My question is also related to the Russia-Ukraine, sir. Could you elaborate what aspects were discussed in this meeting? What were the expectations from the Austrian side, and also on the EU-India FTA? Any deadline, anything from the Austrian side, sir, if you can elaborate?
Please.
So this is Gautam Roy from DD News and DD India. I just wanted to ask about what the Prime Minister said about taking this ties that we have with Austria to the strategic phase and a 10-year roadmap as well. If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Anna Savaral from the Austrian daily Der Standard, and my question goes along similar lines. Also, Austrian Chancellor Nehammer today said that he was very interested in the perspective of Narendra Modi, of Putin, concerning Putin's vision for a peace process. Could you give us a little more details on what his Prime Minister Modi's vision is? or perspective is. And my second question is, there have been news bits about some friction in Moscow, and that one session was cancelled between a Russian and Indian delegation, and whether you can give us some, can you tell us something about this? Or if there's any truth to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get the last part of your question out of the way. To the best of my knowledge, there were no cancellations of any particular programming element during Prime Minister's visit to Moscow. Your reference to friction, I actually find it a little surprising, but there are no facts to this. It's factually incorrect, quite misleading in fact. So, Prime Minister's visit to Moscow was extremely successful. In fact, the discussions between Prime Minister and the President far exceeded the time that was actually allocated by the two systems in planning the visit. And there were absolutely no cancellation of any kind of any of the programming elements during the Moscow leg. Let me take the Russia-Ukraine related set of questions as one, because there are many aspects of it, which come together, and most of the questions are, variation of one another. But that's the nature of the issue at hand. First of all, in terms of the messaging on Russia-Ukraine conflict by India, what Prime Minister has been very consistent in messaging on this issue is also what he articulated during his visit to Moscow. He has been very consistent and clear about this, not just in private meetings, but equally in the public positioning that he has taken, and he has very openly spoken about that. So when he met with the president, with the Russian president in September 2022, which was on the sidelines of the SCO summit in Samarkand, in Uzbekistan, Prime Minister clearly mentioned there, and he repeated part of it today in his discussions, that this is not an era of war. This is what he said in September 20. He said it publicly, not something which he said in private. During discussions in Moscow, of which he gave a reasonably detailed account and shared it with the Austrian Chancellor also, my Prime Minister very clearly said there, and he repeated that in press remarks today to the press, roughly translated it into English. It had three key elements to it. One, that this is not time of war, which is what something is said in September 22. Second important thing, which he publicly said in Moscow and repeated here, that the solution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict cannot be found on the battlefield. And three, he again spoke very clearly on this in Moscow and reiterated it today, that wherever innocent lives are lost, in particular children's lives are lost, those are unacceptable under any circumstances. In discussions in Moscow and with the Austrian Chancellor also today, we clearly brought out that the dialogue and diplomacy, and not the battlefront war, is a way forward in finding a solution to this. In discussing this, Prime Minister was also very clear that whatever contribution India can make in arriving at that peaceful solution through dialogue and diplomacy, we would be very, very happy to make that contribution. It is natural that all sides involved in this have to be, agree to this for this process to move forward. And this was the context in which the path forward on Russia-Ukraine conflict was talked about, discussed. As I mentioned in my opening remarks also, Prime Minister elaborated in considerable detail the challenges that the countries of the global south and India also faced, and some of it still continue to face in terms of the derivative impact on the economic growth parameters. So energy security was impacted in the early months of the conflict, and some of it is still a matter of stress especially for those economies which rely heavily on imports of energy inputs, fertilizer security, food security, and while there is a certain kind of equilibrium which is currently there in terms of the countries of the global south trying to address this challenge, but the risk of it still remains. This is what was the broad aspects of discussion on Russia-Ukraine, that solution cannot be found on the battlefield. Dialogue and diplomacy is the way to go forward. India would be very happy to make whatever contribution it can or is called upon to make in trying to resolve this particular challenge. On the question relating to India-EU free trade agreement, as I mentioned, both the Austrian Chancellor and the Indian Prime Minister spent some time not looking at the specifics of the India-EU FTA, because that's not to be discussed really in a bilateral forum. But the context was that given the kind of global developments that are taking place, India-EU partnership in general, and within that space, India-EU FTA assumes great significance. When India-EU started their FTA negotiations 20 plus years ago, the world, the global economy, India's role in the world economy, India's own economic growth, the fact that we are now close to becoming the third largest economy has changed fundamentals of such discussions. The complementarities of the two economies between EU and India have also evolved over a period of time. And it was stressed that, in that light, it was stressed that it was important, and Prime Minister was very clear that from our side we are absolutely ready to expedite this and fast track the discussion. Of course, EU is the other side which has to also come on board on this. But the point was very clear that this is an opportunity, not just in the India-EU partnership, but also the impact it could have on the larger global economic growth, given that it will connect in a very meaningful way two of the largest economic drivers in different domains globally. EU is a very strong driver of technology-based economic growth. It is a huge center for science, technology and research development, which links then to the industrial ecosystems globally. And India's rapid growth and which has a very promising future in terms of years ahead. The idea is that this FTA could bring together the strengths of the two economies together and do that through the FTA. This was in a related aspect was the discussions on you talked about India-Austria strategic vision for 10 years. So when the two leaders discussed this particular issue, and it was not just limited to discussion between the Prime Minister and the Austrian Chancellor, but also when they together met with the CEOs later in the session. Currently, the India-Austria trade is roughly somewhere between 2.5 to $3 billion. In absolute terms, there is a lot more that we can do in increasing those trade volumes. But even at these volumes, which have doubled just in last few years, it still makes India a very important trade partner for Austria. But the discussions also actually went into considerable detail on, okay, now if this is the base and the fact that there are roughly 150 Austrian companies that are very active in India, now how do we take this forward based on the core strengths of the Austrian economy, of the Austrian industrial system, and link it to the opportunities that exist in the Indian economic, inherent in India's economic growth. And when they started talking about it, the technology as a domain came into focus. But within that, the technology in specific area was found to be of great relevance. So I mentioned some of these areas in my remarks earlier on: renewable energy, areas relating to green development per se. And within that, one can look at several other subdomains. Climate change issues and the technologies involved in mitigating the challenge of climate change. Where can the two countries partner there? And more in terms of commercial partnerships, not just in terms of conceptual discussions between the two sides. Waste management, both liquid waste and the solid waste management, in that sense, again very important. Technology, research in what we call as critical and emerging technology areas. These would include quantum, artificial intelligence, research in the field of space. There are already some of the Indian startups in the space sector that work very closely with the Austrian research and education system. Priorities to link the Austrian research system in their universities with the commercial opportunities in India. How do we mix and match the correct size of the companies, given that the size of companies in Austria is unique to Austria. Now how do we find correspondingly strong partners on the Indian side, so that what they bring to the table can be beneficial to both the economies. So when they spoke about the vision for years ahead, the idea is that these things will get fleshed out, will then be given a specific shape in terms of commercial partnerships, and taken forward now in a purposeful way. In this context, both Austrian Chancellor and the Prime Minister also spoke about the need for maybe mobility and the migration partnership, given that there are clear skill complementarities between the two economies that could be harnessed for the benefit of both the economies. So when the two leaders spoke of economic partnership, their vision where this would head, it had all these elements which I mentioned, and also this is also the sentiment which we found very clearly reflected by the business community on both sides, between the Confederation of Indian Industry, which was representing the business segment from the Indian side, and I think it was the Austrian Federal Chamber of Commerce, if I'm not wrong, from the WKO side and this side. It's an extremely promising area. It is a promising area because increasingly the nature of economic relationship is not just limited to the conventional trade of goods that you define. It's extending to services, and services of goods have got a positive feedback loop. The digital space, not just in terms of services, but digital products, which are conventionally, a very different space altogether, was something which they spent a good time talking about, because India's digital stack has generated a large spectrum of digital products, whether you look at digital identity-based products, digital payments-based products, customized solution which can fit into the digital needs of any country, their open source architecture, the fact that they are very secure, the fact that they do not base themselves on storing the data of other countries, combined with the huge setup relating to the data service providing network which is developing in India. This is a large space in itself, and I think is a very promising space of cooperation between India and Austria. So all this formed a basket of areas in which India and Austria vision was discussed between Chancellor and the Prime Minister, between themselves and also with the business community. Thank you. Yes, please.
Bethany Bell, BBC. You said it was 41 years since an Indian Prime Minister has visited Austria. What made the Prime Minister decide to come now?
I'm Martin Eder from Bloomberg News. Two follow-up questions on Russia and Ukraine, if I may. The first question, both Austria and India have been offering a platform for dialogue and negotiations. Do you have any specific plans for meetings, or have you discussed opportunities to organize meetings between the two parties? And the second question is, you as the head of India's diplomacy, you were obviously, I assume, also in Moscow and here. What is your main takeaway from these two meetings regarding sort of your view on the situation and perhaps India's position towards the conflict?
Thank you. The first request, Secretary West, perhaps he can respond to the question from BBC on 41 years.
Sure. Thank you. No, you're right. It has been 41 years, but it's not that we've abandoned each other for these 41 years. There has been contact, and much more in recent years, both in the context of direct India-Austria bilateral relations, but also in the context of the EU. I think I should mention to you that in 2020 we were expecting and hoping for a visit of the President, possibly of the Chancellor, but then we had COVID-19, which unfortunately came in the way, and then things have sort of gone in another direction. Since then, there was good engagement at the foreign minister level, several meetings, and there was a build-up. We're looking for the right occasion. We've had a series of developments in India, which had, so scheduling issues did come in, but I think the Prime Minister was keen that early in his third term he was going to look for an opportunity, and that's how it has worked out. So this was something he was keen on, and I should say that you heard the Foreign Secretary say that not only did he invite Chancellor Nehammer to come by at his convenience, but he reiterated the invitation to the President also, saying that you were planning to come in 2020. It didn't work out, but that's still very much in the cards, so please let us know, and we'll be happy to welcome you there. So it's a clear push, realizing that there is plenty more potential in the relationship, and as he said, great emphasis on the economic side, on technology, on research, scientific research, innovation. These are the areas of push, and so this is how it has actually come about. Thanks.
On the follow-up question on Russia-Ukraine that you asked, I would put this across to you. Right from the start of this conflict till date, my Prime Minister has been very strongly engaged with both sides. We have also been a very active participant in the various whatever peace efforts have been going on to find a solution aimed at Russia-Ukraine conflict. At the Birkenstock conference most recently also we participated. Secretary West led the Indian delegation to that meeting, and we articulated the need for dialogue and diplomacy and finding a way forward through dialogue and diplomacy at that meeting. Prime Minister met with President Zelensky first at the sidelines of the G summit in Tokyo, that was last year, and most recently at the G7 summit in Italy. Then his meeting with President Putin most recently, just yesterday and day before, and also his meeting with him on the sidelines of the SCO summit. All through this engagement, and there have also been numerous phone calls, both between Prime Minister, President Zelensky, Prime Minister, and President Putin. All through this engagement, both in terms of physical meetings at the leadership level and the phone calls, we have been urging, our message to them has always been that you need to find a way forward through dialogue and diplomacy. And in that, if they see, we are from our side have offered all support and all contribution that we can make to realize this particular thing. And of course, it is in terms of the meeting, it is actually for the two sides to work it out, because we have also maintained that for this to be successful going forward, the two sides need to, parties involved in this have to sit together and talk about it. That has been our view. We have been extremely, absolutely consistent about this, both in our private meetings and in our public articulations, and have offered, as I said, our readiness to play whatever role we can to find a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Thank you.
François Murphy from Reuters. The Austrian Chancellor said that he was interested in the comments made earlier. Sorry, at the Chancellor's office. The Austrian Chancellor said he was interested to hear Prime Minister Modi's description of Russian President Putin's current thinking and state of mind on the situation in Ukraine. So, what did Prime Minister Modi tell Chancellor Nehammer about that? And then also, just to follow up on my colleague's question, you've said several times that there can't be a solution through on the battlefield, and there has to be a solution through dialogue. But in the comments made earlier, at least on the Austrian side, it was sort of hinted at that it would be happy to host any future talks. And the question is are they simply expressing the usual hopes of business as usual, or is there something specific in the works currently?
Yeah. Okay. Look, I can only share with you, our perspective on this, because it is very beyond a point. Looking at the conflict from our perspective, looking at this conflict from the perspective of challenges that it poses to the countries of the global south, to the larger peace and stability of the region. Whatever is needed to be done to address this through dialogue and diplomacy and not through the war is something which we've always believed in. My Prime Minister has always believed in it, and that is why this is something which has come across with a deep sense of belief. It's not something which is limited to the articulation. That belief is expressed in Prime Minister's desire to whatever role he can play, or whatever role can India play in doing this. But as I said, ultimately it is for the entities and the countries involved in the conflict who need to come together and sit. But that's something which they have to do. But there is a certain concern relating to the conflict and the derivative impacts of this conflict. So, as a very responsible and a peace-loving member of the global community, my Prime Minister has said what needs to be said publicly, and I can say very few countries have said this publicly, that you can't find solution to this conflict on the battlefield. He has been one of the very few leaders who has publicly and openly said this, and said this not just in a third country, but also to the Russian president. Thank you.
And on President Putin's.
All right, you're watching the Indian Foreign Secretary Vinay Kwatra's press conference live from Vienna. He was briefing journalists on the just concluded talks between the leaders of India and Austria. He spoke about how India has decided to raise its ties with Austria to a strategic level. Both leaders discussed about trade as well, among other things, including the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The joint statement, reading, and I'm paraphrasing it here, it says, concerning the war in Ukraine, both leaders supported any collective effort to facilitate a peaceful resolution consistent with international law and the UN Charter. Both sides believe that achieving a comprehensive and lasting peace in Ukraine requires bringing together all stakeholders and a sincere and earnest engagement between the two parties to the conflict.